Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third of our 2021 Leadership Alliance Virtual Professional Development Series, Conversations with a Doctoral Scholar. My name is Alex Weingar. I'm an MD PhD student at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, and I'm also a two-time alumni of the Leadership Alliance Summer Research Early Identification Program. I'm like super totally stoked to be here this afternoon to have a conversation with Dr. Meda Higa, and she's an assistant professor of biology at York College in Pennsylvania. Now, Dr. Higa and I have something really cool in common, and that's that we're both alumni of Brown University's Leadership Alliance program. So Dr. Higa, I would love for you to kick us off and tell us about what Leadership Alliance means to you and how that sort of helped propel you on your journey towards a PhD and eventually an academic faculty track.
That's a great question, Alex, and thank you for the introduction. Hi for all of you guys out there. My name is Dr. Meda Higa. Feel free during this to call me Meda, but to my students, I'm Dr. Higa, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But yes, I did the Leadership Alliance at Brown University for my first internship, and that really trajectored me into looking at research and doing research actually for a career. I did an internship at Brown University back in '97, I want to say. So it's been a long time, and I'm sure that actually I've seen how the program has really grown since then, but it really was my very first experience doing research. It was my first experience in a lab, as well as my first experience on the East Coast. And so a lot of things changed for me after that summer. I would say one of the big things that changed was just understanding really what was going on in all of the textbooks that I had been reading up until that point. And I went to a pretty big university, so my classes had several hundred students in it. You didn't get that very personal interaction with a professor, so I was a little intimidated, maybe a lot intimidated. And being able to kind of get into the lab and talk to other students that were going to be PhDs, other undergraduates were there with me, and actually talking to my mentor and learning a lot more about what the realities were of doing research were really important. It made me realize that all those questions that I always had about all of the science that I was learning were not odd. I wasn't just weird for wanting to know the why of everything, that this is where I really belonged. And so I think that's what really set me apart from my original intent, which was maybe looking at healthcare and going into medicine a little bit, was that I wanted to know a lot more about why things were happening. And I really found that that was my calling with research.
That's amazing. And I think you pick up on something that's so interesting that really resonated with me, and that's that being able to conduct research in the lab at such a wonderful institution. It really is a fantastic opportunity to be able to translate that learned classroom knowledge and be able to see, the real world applications of the work that you're doing, and I just personally think that's the coolest thing. I'm just curious, did you go straight into your PhD, or did you take any time off in between?
That's a great question. So I did my undergraduate, and then after my senior year, I thought I knew that I wanted to do research because of this internship that I had had, but I wasn't entirely sure. So I actually did take a year off. I went into industry, and so I worked for a company that was at the time Hewlett-Packard Labs, which is now Agilent Technologies, and I did lab research in a biotech company setting, which was way different than academia and really gave me something else to kind of compare against what I had done at Brown University, and gave me another perspective on what you could do with laboratory research. At the end of the day, it wasn't exactly what I was interested in, but it was really helpful to have that insight going into a PhD program. So I used that year that I was in biotech to apply for PhD programs. I applied to several Leadership Alliance institutions, including Brown University, and I interviewed there, and New York University at the time. But I eventually settled at the University of Utah because they are really well known for their genetics. And at the time, what I thought I was going to do was go into genetics, and this was a great place to be. So that's that's why I applied there. But part of what really drew me in, and part of, for those of you making those decisions about where to go next, or Alex, since you've already made this decision, you know, it's much more than just, you know, the school that you're going to, right? It's a lot about, do you click with the faculty that are there? Do you see yourself working with a couple of different faculty at least, because you might not get your first choice in that lab? Is the culture of the students something that you're really into? And I really meshed well with the students that were there. They all seemed to know each other. They seemed to know the faculty. They had a very collegial aspect to their interactions. And Salt Lake City is just a beautiful, beautiful place to be. And it's a place where I could see myself picking up a couple of different things. I learned to snowboard there. I learned to do rock climbing. And so there were social aspects that I found appealing as well.
That's amazing. You know, it's funny you mentioned too the snowboarding, because I went to undergrad in Vermont, and for me, skiing was something that I hadn't had exposure to, but it's something, you know, with the whole winter sports and finding that right social niche was also like super important, and something that I guess I wasn't necessarily always thinking about. You know, before at least I went to St. Jude, you know, I was so sort of encaptivated on just the name of the institution, you know, that I didn't even think of that social aspect. So I think that's definitely something really great for future doctoral scholars to be able to keep in mind. Now, throughout your PhD journey, I know that not everybody's journey in, you know, their PhD program is totally linear. And I'm just curious, you know, was there ever a point where you sort of had to take a moment and take a step back and say, wait a minute, is this something I can do? Or, you know, was there a moment in your educational years where you didn't think that you would be able to achieve the professional goals and aspirations that you've since been able to obtain during your training?
Yeah, you know, what it sounds like you're talking about is the imposter syndrome, and this whole idea of, do we really belong where we are? And I think that I had it all along, so I don't think it was anything new, but getting into the internship program at the Leadership Alliance was my first experience with, do I really even belong here? I've never done research before in my life. I don't even really know how to use a pipette because we haven't gotten to that point in lab yet. So those were questions that I was asking from the very beginning, and those voices, unfortunately, haven't gone away. I don't think that they ever really go away, but I think that you develop ways to kind of deal with those things. So yeah, absolutely. My second year of graduate school, we do something called qualifiers, or prelim examinations, and you basically go in a room, and at our school it was 4 or 5 faculty that sit around a table that grill you on a proposal that you've written on a subject matter that's not your own research, and you have to be able to defend the scientific decisions that you make at that point. And it's really scary, and at that point I think a lot of us have that same thought, which is, do we really belong there? But what I find is that if you can just get past that moment in time and believe that you're there, if you weren't, if you didn't belong there, that you wouldn't be there, that somebody else must have believed that you should have belonged there. If you can believe that long enough, you can usually move past that. So yeah, I think graduate school, there were several times when I wasn't sure if I belonged. There were also several times when I questioned whether or not I was on the right path for myself. And I think that introspection is good to keep you moving in the right direction. And I had a lot of friends that were in graduate school that chose different paths too, because they made those decisions that were right for them at that period in time.
I think we should definitely go back and talk about, you know, sort of different paths and sort of how you landed in your tenure track position, you know, and how you sort of went about exploring other things that you can do with a PhD, since they're so numerous. I'm just curious, you know, throughout that sort of battle with imposter syndrome, and I know it doesn't necessarily go away instantaneously, but you can find, as you mentioned, different ways to cope with it. What role did your mentor play in that journey? And, you know, how did you go about choosing a mentor who you felt comfortable having those more personal and those more tangible, real conversations with?
That's a great question. And actually, I would say that goes back to the Leadership Alliance, and maybe even a little bit before that. I think in undergrad, I was lucky enough to stumble upon mentors without realizing that that's what I needed. That's what they were called, just people that were looking out for my best interests and wanted to, you know, see me achieve certain things. But at the Leadership Alliance, through all of the workshops that we went to, and even in dealing with my own PI that I was doing research with, it became really apparent that those people whether or not they were a formal mentor or one that you sought out on your own, were really people that could champion you, help hold you up, that could help give you guidance when you needed it, and could also maybe give you a swift kick in the butt when you needed that too. And one of the big things that came out of the Leadership Alliance was this idea that you really had to pick a mentor that you meshed well with. And so one of the best things of advice that I got was, when you go to look for a lab, you want to be able to work well with your mentor, with the PI that's leading the lab, so that you can have a good relationship and so that they can help you propel your career forward. And so that's what I sought out when I got to the University of Utah. That's how I ended up in a lab that wasn't genetics, was because I rotated through several different labs, and I liked the genetics that I was doing in the genetics lab, but my mentor and I just didn't feel like we were a good fit. And instead, the mentor that I met in oncological sciences, who was doing nuclear pore transport, which I knew nothing really about, and was initially not that excited about either, to be truth be told, but she was such a great mentor for me, and it was really obvious that she was invested in all of her students doing well in the lab, finding opportunities for them, so that they could go on and be successful in whatever they wanted to do. And that's kind of the
That's
advice
amazing.
that I've taken to heart ever since then, was that every place I go, I want to make sure that there's somebody there that I can be mentored by. And now, as I get a little bit more advanced, that I'm hopefully doing the same, and then paying it back by mentoring others.
That's awesome that you totally just embrace and live the meaning of like a continuum of mentorship and being able to have such a strong, mentorship team. I'm just curious, is there anybody outside of your academic faculty mentor, who you conducted your dissertation with, that you also, connected with, and what would be your advice to these sort of up and coming scholars in seeking and finding somebody outside of the lab? I think so often we think, oh my God, it can only be, my faculty mentor. And how did you go about finding people outside of that umbrella?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I have to think about that for a little bit. I think some mentors you just kind of find organically. So there's somebody that you run across maybe in an organization that you're in. I know in undergraduate, I wasn't involved in research at my own institution, but I was involved in student activities. And so I had student activity mentors that weren't able to mentor me on the science, but were certainly able to mentor me on leadership skills, or how to organize things, how to just do different things like that. And then I would say that when I got into my graduate program, and the same thing with my postdoc, there were other faculty that weren't my own, but ones that I just felt like I could go to, or always seemed to be on track with what I was doing. Like they seemed to be interested in my
Totally.
research, or I could have a conversation with them about not necessarily wanting to go to a Research One institution, and they didn't flinch or get a weird eye wink or something going on. So those were people that I think that I gravitated towards, and some of those people I think I didn't realize until later that they were mentors. It was like I don't know, they would just drop little hints before I really knew what I wanted to do. Whereas like, oh, Meda, seems like you're really good at this, or it seems like you really like to do this. Have you thought about this? And so it were those kind of, coffee conversations that you have at the coffee table that those also became mentors as well.
That's amazing that you were able to find those mentors that really invested in you as a person. And I think that's something that we all need to keep an eye out for as we move forward in our careers. And it's also just surprising, looking back, I think when you're in the moment, you might feel like you're kind of on this island and you do have some other people around you, but it is amazing that when you do take that step back, that there's this whole army behind you of not only just faculty, but, support service people at the institutions and everything like that. I'm just curious, you also had mentioned that, you chose a lab that was focused on nuclear transport, and I know that wasn't exactly what you had gone in thinking you were going to do. Originally, you were thinking about genetics, and now you ended up in you're a huge virologist and had the opportunity to meet with Dr. Rachel Levine. How did you go about transitioning fields of research, and did you ever feel that you were pigeonholed? And how did you go about keeping an open mind and focusing on those transferable skills to be able to change your field?
Yeah, I think when I was at the Leadership Alliance, I thought that the first lab that I picked was what I had to do for the rest of my life. And so I spent a really long time thinking about exactly what type of lab I wanted to end up with when I went into my PhD programs. And I had known genetics, I was doing genetics, so it made perfect sense to me to continue doing that because I was very interested in it. And part of it was those other little voices that were coming out saying, you know, you need to really look at a lab that's going to support you to complete your PhD, that's going to help you publish, that you mesh well with a mentor. And so I think I probably stumbled into that first one a little bit on accident, but uh, but then I was like, okay, well, that's graduate school. And what I quickly found was that other students that were years ahead of me, postdocs that were in the labs around me, that they didn't necessarily keep to the same topic. And actually, at our institution, they really encouraged you to go out and read papers in other areas and talk to faculty in diverse areas. So we had like an umbrella program where we talked to, we were a biochemistry lab, but we talked to geneticists, we talked to neurobiologists, and I saw the benefit of really getting a broad education for all of that. So when it came time for me to choose a postdoc, I think I was a little burnt out from from nuclear transport, to be a little honest. I had spent about 6.5, 7 years on it. At that point, a couple projects didn't work out, which we could talk about. So by the time I got to choosing a postdoc, I really was interested in doing something else. But my mentor gave me a lot of leeway to read a lot of papers that were on things somewhat related or not at all related to what I was doing before. And I had always had an interest in virology. My dad actually passed away from liver cancer. He had hepatitis B. So hepatitis B was this other kind of interesting thing that I always wanted to know more about. And so when I was looking in that direction, I really branched out and again, picked a few labs not knowing very much about what it was that they were doing, but then the opportunity to go and meet with them really solidified like who were the people that I thought were going to help me the best to go where I wanted to go. And that's how I switched directions. Now, I got hired here at York College to do virology. So I'm kind of in this place now where I've got this thing, but the really nice thing about being here is that it's my research topics that I pick. So I bring in undergraduates and we're like a small liberal arts college. So we don't have graduate students. We're not a huge R01 institution, but I do see a lot of undergraduates. And so the undergraduates come to me for maybe a semester, maybe a year, if I'm lucky, a little bit longer. And they come to me with some ideas about what they want to do, but in general, I kind of steer them in directions that I think are going to work. And the cool thing is that if they see a really cool picture or not picture, really cool article, want to try something a little bit new, I do have a little bit of flexibility to kind of to change directions a little bit. And that's been really nice. So I haven't had to keep working on hantaviruses, which is what I did my postdoc on. I've done hantaviruses, but I've also done, respiratory syncytial virus, and I've done a tiny little bit of Ebola, but not in the whole virus context. So I've gotten a chance to test out a couple of different viruses while I've been here, and that's been really nice. But yeah, I think being flexible is hugely important, right? Like you never know when something's going to come up, or like the next big thing, like COVID, just like pop out of nowhere, right? And maybe you're doing a PhD in something right now, but you're so interested in what's going on with SARS-CoV-2 that maybe now after this, you want to jump into a totally different area of research. I could totally see that happening. And you bring with you all of those skills from the past lab that you were in. And that's a great way to move science forward in general, right? You bring biochemistry skills into a virus lab. You take virus skills into a neurobiology lab, and there's now connections between viruses and neurobiology. And so I think it's a good thing to keep your options open, to be open to those opportunities and to look for opportunities where you can be interdisciplinary in your work.
That's neat. And I'm learning so much from this conversation because I didn't even realize that your virology research spanned all these different viruses and all these different facets within virology. And it almost makes me chuckle thinking back on my journey because, my first research experience, I studied lung inflammasome signaling, then I studied lung cancer, then I moved into, preclinical animal model testing before I did epidemiology and muscle wasting, throughout different rotations, in my current program. And at first I was like, wait a minute, what am I doing? I need to be able to pinpoint exactly what it is that I want to do. But the way you're telling the story, and I just think it's so amazing that you're right. If you focus on those transferable skills, it really does let you not only meet people in different fields, but it lets you become more marketable per se, and, be the link between your PI and another lab and really take ownership of some really neat projects that you can have so much autonomy over, which is so much fun. You talked a little bit about your transition to from grad school to postdoc to now where you're on a tenure track faculty position, and I'm just curious if you always knew you wanted to do academia and go into a tenure track faculty pathway, or if you ever explored industry or government jobs with a PhD, and how did you end up landing in your current path as a tenure track?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I did do a little bit of exploring with biotech. So I looked into that a little bit. Really during my PhD, our program was really nice. They were very open to, and the students really spearheaded this, like career days where we brought in people who had taken other, at the time they called them alternative career paths. Right now it's just, or non-traditional, I think. Also, I don't know what they call them now, but basically career paths that weren't your tenure track R01 professor. And so we got a chance to listen to government, people who are gone into government, people who are doing that sort of thing. And I didn't really know when I left graduate school still what I wanted to do. So my whole approach to a postdoc was, well, I know I need to do a postdoc if I want to be an R01 professor. And so I don't want to close that door yet. And I need to buy myself a little bit more time to figure out what I really want to do, right? What do I want to be when I grow up? So I did a postdoc initially to do that. And one of the nice things was that University of Pennsylvania, which is where I did my postdoc, where I chose to do my postdoc, that happened to be the lab that I wanted to be in, was there. Dr. Domes is an amazing man who's done a lot of HIV research, so I wanted to be in a virology lab there. But the bonus was that they were just starting up a program called an IRACTA program. And I am embarrassed to say I don't remember what IRACTA stands for. It's a long acronym, but basically it's a teaching and research postdoctoral fellowship program. So I'm an IRACTA scholar of the Penport program, and it gives us funding. So you get funding to be in a research lab to do research, but also to have teaching opportunities at underrepresented and minority serving institutions. And so I was able to do both of those, and I could rationalize this to my PI, who was way understanding to begin with, but I could rationalize it to my PI by saying, well, I'm getting funding, I'm getting money to teach. So this is part of how you're going to pay me is if I get release time to teach. And I got the chance to try out teaching before I made that career choice by myself. And so that was really nice to have that opportunity. I got a chance to go to a couple different conferences that taught me best practices on some active learning and other teaching things. So, and I realized that I wasn't ruining the lives of all my students, which was my biggest worry, I think, was that I was going to be like that teacher that like made them choose to not go into science for the rest of their life. That maybe I might lose a few, but I could also do a lot to get people excited about science. And so that really solidified my decision to apply to teaching programs. Now, it also solidified my decision.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say it also solidified my decision to not go to a large institution because I really wanted those interactions with my students. And I realized that I couldn't do without that, which I also learned in this program too.
That's so important, especially because I feel like you've always been so open-minded, but I think as an undergraduate, at least speaking for myself, I remember thinking there, oh my God, I got to know exactly what it is I want to do and where I want to be in 10 to 15 years from now. But I think it's awesome that you sort of embrace the vulnerability of, okay, I'm going to do a postdoc, see if this is something I really want to do before fully investing yourself in that trajectory. And I just think that's amazing. Now, I know that STEM fortunately is continuing to get more diverse, and there's some really great programs and some great mentorship opportunities. I'm just curious as to, some of the challenges that you may have faced as a woman in STEM and how you overcame them.
Yeah, as a woman, as a underrepresented student, those
For
those
sure.
things came up. I would say not, thankfully, like for me, not a whole lot. But there was a time when I was asked to apply for a scholarship or a fellowship in graduate school, and it was meant for like they needed to up their numbers of underrepresented students that were applying to it. I didn't get it the first time, and so I was like, are they asking me because they want another applicant to show their numbers, or what is this? But then I did apply again and I did get it. Um so there have been those little instances. I would say for women in STEM, that hit me later. And that's because, I took my time. I married late. I had kids late. And so here I am in this career, and I'm now trying to balance. I have a 14-year-old and a 4-year-old. And I have a husband who works weird hours. Sometimes he's an electrician. And so sometimes he's up really early in the morning, and sometimes he has to work on the weekends. And so that has been a struggle. I feel like as a woman, because of my own internal pressures, that I feel like that I'm supposed to be the mother, and that I'm supposed to be, this caregiver to my family. And I've had to um, tell myself to let go a little bit of some of that, and to let other people in my family really take the reins on that. I'm lucky enough to have my mother-in-law that lives with me. Some people might not say that's lucky, but she's really great with my kids. And she covers for me when I need her to. My husband will pick up the slack if I ask him to do that. And so having a good supportive family, I think, is really, really important. But there's a couple really important things to pick up from that. Is that one, we have to be careful of not just the stress that other people put on us, but also the stress and the stigmas that we put on ourselves, and to give ourselves a little grace for that. But also that regardless if you're a man or a woman, that if you want to be able to have a family, that it's really important that you have that supportive network behind you to help you do that. And that it's possible. It's possible to be a professor, or to be whatever you want to be, and to have a family, raise a family, and spend time with them at the same time. And I really, I draw hard lines sometimes for myself, which means I don't always get things done as soon as I would like for family or for work. But you just kind of have to learn when to make those decisions so that you can do both. And I think it's possible.
Yeah, I mean, I'm never going to complain. Now that I know that you have a 4 and a 14-year-old, I'm never going to complain about anything else on my plate again, in addition to all your work. So that's just awesome. I mean, good for you for being able to balance it. And I'm just, I'm curious even now. I know you shared a little bit about how you balance everything now as a faculty member, and how and everything's sort of a give and take. And maybe some weeks you can give a little more here, and the next week maybe you have to prioritize a little bit over there in this direction. Even when you were a student, how did you go about kind of being able to balance your the academic rigor of the University of Utah, and feeling the need to publish while also maintaining your social sanity? Because for me, it took forever to be able to realize that, me taking a 15-minute break isn't procrastination if it's going to make me more productive moving forward for the next few hours. So how did you go about navigating that in grad school, and how do you still sort of balance that now as a faculty member?
Yeah, that's a great question. Maybe I should pose that question to you, because it sounds
Oh,
like you've got some good ideas. I would say that like a lot of it was learning by process of I had some failures in there for
totally.
sure. I think one thing that I would say, if I could tell my former undergrad self or my graduate student self, was that one, I needed to be more present when I could be in whatever it was that I was doing, so that if I'm in the lab, that I'm just thinking about the research that I'm doing, and trying to move that forward, versus if I'm on the slopes snowboarding on a mountain, that I'm not thinking about my science all the time. Although some great ideas did come up when I was sitting on the chairlift waiting to get to the top. So
That's amazing.
yeah, so maybe it's good to have like the back and forth, but I think you just have to make yourself balance. And I think that looks different for a lot of people, but being this one I'm learning now, be present where you are when you're there, and then just accept that you're there, and then move on to the next thing that you're doing, and then be present there, because it doesn't do me any good to worry about if I'm spending enough time with my family when I'm sitting here at work and I have 50 papers to grade, right? I need to just grade those papers and get them done so I can get home, and then I can be present when I'm spending time with my family. And I think the more that you kind of tell yourself that, and I'm still telling myself that, the better off you'll be.
Definitely. Yeah, being present is so super important. And at least for me, I think the way that I've learned I work best is that unless I'm taking care of myself more holistically in terms of, being able to see friends and being able to see family, if I'm not taking care of those areas of my life, I can't be fully present, in my academic journey, and whether it's being in rounds in clinic or whether it's being in the lab doing research, so I do think it's so important to recognize that just because somebody else might be there, working 16-hour days, 6 days a week, that doesn't work for everyone, and that's totally okay. And it's about setting your own goals and being realistic for yourself and not always comparing yourself to everyone else around you. I mean, it sounds like that's sort of the one of the take-home messages.
Yeah, I think I see you do have these great great ideas.
Not as good as yours, but
well, you like you said, I think you just have to be okay with where you're at and what you're capable of doing. And I will say, I'm not perfect, and I've made mistakes, and I've let people down. And then at those times, you just have to own up to it and say, I'm not perfect. I let you down. I'm sorry. I'm going to try and do better. And I guess just to say that none of us are going to get it right every single time. But half of it is how you get back up and keep pushing forward after you've maybe not done so good. And so those are things that you have to do. Yeah.
wow, resiliency. It's
There
definitely
you go.
a key concept that I'm sure we'll revisit time and time again. And at least the current scholars and summer students are going to hear a lot about throughout the course of the summer. And in terms of your current job, I mean, I'd like to learn too, just for myself, what does it take to get to that tenure track faculty position? I mean, what are the requirements to get there?
Yeah, so that's going to depend, but I would say, so I will talk to my experience because I can't speak to others. Going to an R01 institution is way different than going to a teaching institution such as mine. So York College, like I said before, small liberal arts, almost exclusively undergraduates, all undergraduates in biology. And those were the types of places that I was looking for when I went to apply to to, to teaching institutions. I wanted to do teaching first, but I also wanted to keep my research plan. And so that's actually what you need to do. I've sat on several search committees here and hired faculty that have come in after me, and all of them have good research experience. They've published. They have many of them have done postdocs, but not necessarily all of them here have done postdocs, but all of them have teaching experience of some sort. And so whether or not it was TAing when they were a graduate student, and most of them have a little bit more, they've gone on to do maybe adjunct teaching at a community college or a college that's near them, or maybe they've done, they have visiting professor positions at some of these places that will hire you for a year or two to do a little bit of teaching there, and then you'll move on to the tenure track position here. And so for the tenure track position, those are I think the big qualifications are that you have the research, that you have the teaching, that you're interested in working with undergraduates. At our institution, we value that. If you talk all about your research but don't mention anything about the undergraduates that you're going to work with, then that's usually in the no pile. So those people who apply here really have to have that mentorship piece that's present along with everything else. And so we look at applications that come in. A lot of times they just aren't the right fit. So part of it is just being the right fit. Like we might advertise we're looking for a physiologist, but really what we're looking for is like a plant physiologist, or we're looking for somebody that will work specifically with the chickens that the last professor left here. So sometimes it's like that level of specificity that you can't really know until you apply. And then we invite you onto campus. We do the interview all day long. You meet with everybody in the department. You meet with the administration that's here, and it's a matter of, are you a good fit? Do you ask good questions? Do you ask good questions is really important. We want to know that you're interviewing us as much as we're interviewing you. And do the students like you? So you get to meet with the students, and they have a say too on whether or not they liked your presentation, whether they liked having lunch with you. Did you ask them good questions, things like that. So that's the application process to get in here. And then you have to jump through the next hoops to get from assistant professor to associate professor, to get tenure, and then to become a full professor. And I just realized right before the talk started that it says assistant professor, but I'm tenured, guys. And this is like a big deal. So a couple of years ago, I applied, and you have to put together this big packet where you assess how you're doing. Other people assess you, and you send that in, and you get assessed at several different levels, at your department level, at the institution level by the president of the college. And then they give you a decision as to whether or not you're tenured. So I'm tenured and an associate professor in biology here, which is super exciting. So I wanted to just point that out too.
No, that's amazing. And my sincerest apologies. I did not mean to diminish
That's
all of your
okay.
successes in the least, so I apologize about that. That's totally my fault. Before I do have some questions about your research. I am just curious, because you are at a liberal arts college, obviously there's a huge focus, as you mentioned, on the teaching component. And what do you view your role as an educator? And what piece of advice would you give to somebody who hopes to become an educator? Because obviously, the purpose of I shouldn't say the purpose of, but in grad school, your main focus is research, and they don't teach you necessarily how to teach. Right. So what do you view your role as an educator in that regard?
Ooh, that has morphed since I've gotten here a little bit, but I think the framework, or the foundation of it, is still the same, and that is, gosh, so there's a lot of things in that question. I'm trying to address them one at a time. So I guess I see my job is to facilitate learning. And by facilitate learning, I'm hoping that I can give you the tools, like you being an undergraduate student, that I can give my undergraduates the tools that they need to be able to ask and answer their own questions, to give them, at least a basis of the knowledge and how that works, so that they know where to go to understand those questions. But as much as possible, and this is the direction that education is heading right now, as much as possible, the idea is to give students ownership over their own education. So we call them active learning strategies, or ways that you get the student to do the things that you want them to do without telling them what to do. At our institution, part of our process is that they design their own research project in some of our classes.
Oh, cool.
And then they actually get to carry out that research, and then they write their senior thesis on that research. And so they actually go through that whole scientific process, where they come up with this idea with help and guidance, of course, but then they take it all the way through to a senior thesis, which I think is the best part of our program here. It's the chance for students to really get their hands dirty and find out what it's like to actually go through science for real. So that's what I would say is the basis of it. What were the other parts of that question?
No, I mean, you basically just spoke about your role as an educator, and the importance of being an educator, and what that means to you, and sort of the advice that you would give to others looking to pursue that route, since graduate training is mostly focused on the research, and you don't take a class necessarily on how to teach, if you do want to go.
Yeah, so as part of that ERACTA program, I did actually take a class on teaching, and I took workshops and things like that. So there's lots of things that you can do to further that, especially when you get into graduate school. You can start looking for those opportunities, because there are scholarships to attend some of these workshops and to attend these conferences, where you can learn about best practice strategies for teaching. And so if somebody were interested in that, I would tell them to look into that. ASM, which is the American Society for Microbiology, has a education only conference, and there's an ASBM be has one also. I can't all the acronyms, but basically lots of different societies will have their own programs for education now.
That's great. And you mentioned ASM, and obviously, I'm sure some of these students have been to Aber camps before, the annual biomedical conference for minority students. And you're right. I think that giving your students the autonomy to do their own work is so important. Throughout my undergraduate career, I know this is a little excessive, but I was so privileged to be able to go to more than 20 different conferences, and to be able to have that networking component, and to be able to reach out and be able to speak with deans and program leaders and faculty members at different institutions was so important. And for the students joining us today, definitely look into AberCams. I can put the name in the chat, and I'm sure you'll hear more about it. But I think that's such an important piece that Dr. Higa was just talking about. Now, the other thing that I just wanted to follow up on too was that I know usually it's funny that when I'm having conversations, I'm usually talking about shedding labels and shedding things like that. But there are some labels that hold weight, and a lot of positive weight with that. And one of that is your title of associate professor, but also, the prefix, doctor. And you mentioned that to us today, you can be Meda, but to your students, you're Dr. Higa. So what does that title mean to you?
Yeah, so it started when I got here. That was the culture of our college. So our colleges, or the culture of our college in the biology department, at least, is that all of our professors go by doctor. And at the time I was like, oh, I don't know how I feel about that, because I felt so young, and I was actually really close in age to some of the students. And I wasn't really sure about completely owning that, but I thought a lot about that over the past few years, and especially since a lot of the political hubbub of Dr. Jill Biden came up, and whether or not she actually deserves to be called a doctor. And it made me think about all of the hard work that I put in, and all of the hard work that anybody who has done a doctoral degree has put in, and that they've really earned that title. There's a reason why we are a doctor of philosophy in whatever position that we are, and that's because we've really delved deep into that subject for a significant period of time. And so especially with the politics, I've really started to re-own it. To a certain extent, and I didn't mention this earlier, but at my college, it's important too, because there are those occasional students that will call me Mrs. or Miss, or don't know what to call me. Hey, professor. And so I think it's really important that they understand the training and the qualifications that I have for being, teaching a class and being in front of them. And for some of them, the doctor is a necessary thing to do. So, so when we're in a more, family situation, like I feel like the Leadership Alliance is family, right? Then it's Meda, and everybody who deals with me in my personal life, it's Meda. But yeah, when I'm working, when I'm in my profession, it is Dr. Higa.
That's awesome, and I totally respect that, and think that's so awesome how you're embracing that title that you so totally earned. I mean, this is the coolest thing, and I want to talk about one of the things that I think is just so cool. Maybe it's a little bit of, you can touch upon some of your work that you did do with Dr. Levine and the governor of Pennsylvania. But obviously, as a faculty member, you have to publish, but you're also an educator, and above anything else, it's about effectively communicating information. And there's so much misinformation out there. And I'm just curious about how you go about ensuring that some of the information that you're sharing or that comes out of your lab is accessible to the general public and can be understood.
Yeah, that's a great question. And really, that's something that's happened a lot more recently. But I think it's always been something that I've strived to do, at least, from postdoc above and beyond. And if you had seen me, or if you knew me as an undergraduate, you would have really been surprised that I became a professor, because I was really deathly scared of speaking in public. So one thing I would say, and the Leadership Alliance, like I did it to myself, but the Leadership Alliance gave me the opportunities, was that every opportunity that I had to present my research, to talk in public with other students about research, or to talk to faculty with other research, I took it. And it scared me to death. Like I was really scared to do it. And I did it because I knew that I wouldn't get better unless I did. And I knew that I would need it at some point in the future. So I would say it really started, I think, with the Leadership Alliance. It was really easy to hide at a big institution like UC Santa Cruz.
Totally.
But I couldn't do it at the Leadership Alliance, and all the other students in that program were telling you had to do it too. So it was a little bit of positive peer pressure in that way, which I think was a good thing. Graduate school, same thing, lots of opportunities to speak. And so I took those, and I slowly just got better and better and learned from other people, and had other people read and look at my presentations and tell me when they sucked and tell me what I needed to do to make it better. So I was open to feedback, and positive criticism, I would say, was a good thing to be able to be open to that. And then when I got here, I realized that I had this perfect soapbox of being a teacher, being a professor that had a little bit, had credibility as a biologist at least. And that's kind of the angle that I took. Any real life things that were happening in the news, I kind of, any chance that I could, brought them into the classroom. Our college here has partnered with some sort of communication. I don't even know. I'm not really sure. They sent an email out. Does anybody want to talk to the media about what they do? And I said, well, I talk about viruses. They're really relevant. And so they put me on a list, and I'm not sure if it was through that or through me talking to my friends and people that I knew on Facebook and just kind of educating them about the pandemic as it came up. So a lot of those organic things might have just come together, but eventually I got that call from the governor, the governor's office, to be able to communicate that with, with the whole state of Pennsylvania. And however it happened, I was, again, scared to do this, but took the opportunity because I knew it would be helpful. And I knew that I was pretty good at putting that science at a level that the general public could understand. And they must have liked me enough to call me back again. So I got 2 opportunities to talk.
Wow. I'm just waiting for you to tell me that Oprah called or Ellen DeGeneres called to see you now on ABC, but it's gonna be amazing.
No. No, but it was a great opportunity, and from that, right, I got emails from other people that were like, oh, can you help me understand this? And so I think if you just put yourself out there, if you give yourself those opportunities, then those opportunities will present more opportunities.
Wow, that's really cool. Now you have me thinking of all the things that I want to do this when this call ends, and the emails I want to send, and things that I want to read. I mean, that's just so amazing. And thinking sort of about, and we have about 10 minutes left in our conversation.
Yeah.
I noticed that some students are curious about sort of next steps. And as a faculty member and somebody who's been a part of the Leadership Alliance, how do you recommend about contacting mentors and networking outside of one's institution?
Yeah, let me think about that for a second. I think it's back to that little voice in your head that's like, am I good enough to do this? Should I be here? And if you can manage to just think that you're good enough and, send that email out, or approach that professor that during their office hours at their institution, you might be surprised with what you come up with, and who's willing to help you and who's willing to work with you. So I would say that's one thing that you can definitely do. The approach that I take is that flattery works really well. So if you're looking for that okay, fine, I know where their office hour, their office is, and I know when their office hours are, or I know what their email is, now what? Flattery is the best way. So you must be interested in them for a reason. Tell them why. I'm really interested in the work that you're doing with blah, blah, blah. Maybe, a little paragraph or a couple sentences about, this is the research that I really found cool, and this is why I found it cool, or I have this really important, I have this question, even if you think it's stupid, maybe it's really a good question. And even if it's not a Nobel Prize winning question, it's still going to get the interest of that faculty or the person that you might have as a mentor. And And yeah, there will be people that don't respond to you, and don't take it too personally. Lots of us have really busy lives, lots of things going on. But if I see a student email me a question like that, I'm going to take the time to respond to that student. And and maybe the other people asking me to do something, blah blah blah, serve on a committee, can wait, but I really want to get back to that student. And so if you find other faculty that are like that, then then there you go, you've made the connection. And I would say, take the chance to do that. Just get the guts up to talk to people when you go to conferences, make those connections at conferences. Because the other thing is, you never know when someone down the road is going to be able to help you out, or know a person that can, get you the connection that you need. And certainly, I, and I can't think of any specific examples, but I know that I've run across people and then, I've at least done this. I've linked my students up because they've asked me questions with other people that could link them up with other people, and got them jobs and got them internships. And connections is really one big way how you get those next steps.
That's awesome. And there's two things that I just want to kind of comment on quickly. And the first is, you mentioned like including a question and really referencing something that maybe that faculty member has published before, or something like that. And there really are, sort of very few and far between, in quotes, dumb questions. Because I was in class 3 weeks ago, and I asked the most simplistic question in the world. It was about hydrogen bonding, something like really basic. And all of a sudden, the faculty member goes, "Now that is a great question. I'm so sorry I forgot to touch on it." So it's amazing that even our faculty members, who are some of the brightest minds out there, can still maybe have an oversight now and again, or maybe not think about something in the same light that we have, or maybe we come from a different background with different experiences, and having that sort of confidence in ourselves to be able to ask those questions when it may not seem easy, I think is so pertinent and important. And then when you talk about connecting students, it's funny because my second Leadership Alliance program at Vanderbilt University, I knew that I needed to take a gap year in between applying to MD PhD programs and undergraduate. And this hits on, another question that I saw a student asked while we were talking. And it's, what do you do during a gap year? What can you do? Should you take a gap year? Should you not take a gap year? And it was actually my mentor from my Vanderbilt Leadership Alliance program that connected me with my prep program mentor at Case Western. And for those of you who don't know, prep is a post-bac program for students who may need a little extra research support, or a little extra research training, or additional training, or coursework before being able to sort of excel in top PhD programs. So that's just one thing, that students can look at. But I'm just curious, what would you recommend for students who may need that gap year?
There's so many things that you can do during that gap year, and I advise pre-med students too. So we talk a lot about the gap year, because a lot of them are very, very resistant to the gap year. Like, no, I can't take any time off. But I think that you should do something that is interesting to you. And if what you need is a little bit more time, or decision making for whether the next step is the right step, then you should absolutely try to do something that's in the realm of what it is that you want to do, so that you can make that decision. I tell my students, apply to these internship programs, even if research isn't the thing that you want to do. Now you figured that out, right? And now you figure out that's a direction that you don't want to go in. And that's just as important at the end of the day, maybe a little bit more so, especially when it comes to medical school, right? You don't want to spend like 8-12 years of your life in medical school and realize that you don't want to do it, because that's a lot of money. But
oh yeah.
Right. So you must have taken a little bit of time to make that decision. Did you do something like that?
Yeah, so I took my gap year to go to Case Prep, and at first, I'll be honest, I kind of felt, oh, wait a minute, is this stigmatized, that I'm taking a gap year and I don't necessarily have the throughput to go right through. But once I started in prep, I realized, wait a minute, this is an amazing experience that's not only going to help me develop as a scientist, that's going to allow me to gain more clinical hours, but it's going to provide another opportunity for me to find out what it is that I really want to do, and what it is that I really like and that I'm really passionate about. And I thought that was so important. And the other thing, that I thought was really great about taking a gap year is that, maybe I could have applied and gone somewhere, but it wasn't just about going somewhere. And you talk about, needing to find a place that's not only suitable for you academically, but also socially.
Mm-hmm.
And by taking that gap year, it allowed for me to sort of improve areas that weren't as strong in my application, so that I then could go to a place where I could say, you know what, now I know exactly what I want to do, or maybe not exactly what I want to do, but know where what I would like to be doing, and I can go to a place where that's a possibility. So I just think that's super important. But I also have plenty of friends, that didn't do NIH funded programs, such as ERDO or PrEP or whatnot. And I had some that did explore industry like you did. I had some, that worked at an ice cream shop and just studied, that way they had money coming in and studied for the MCAT, or, did some part-time research. And that was just equally as important. I don't think there's necessarily a formula. I think everybody's so unique in terms of what they need. And it's just about having those mentors that you can confide in and who are willing to have those conversation with you, and, those more real conversations, and say, look, this is where I think you would benefit from. But when we think about having a sort of this mentorship team, it's also okay to have those conversations with multiple people to get multiple opinions, I think, as to what you need, and not just because one person said something, that's what you have to do.
That's a great point. I'm so glad that you brought that up, because you should have mentors in your life for all sorts of different things. And sometimes those mentors are ones that are going to help your career move forward, which I was talking a lot about. But I do also have mentors that help me with my work-life balance. I have people that I talk to that are really like, you really just need to shut down the email responses at like 6 o'clock in the, and everyone else can wait until the next morning, and tell you those kinds of things that aren't necessarily directly related to what it is that you're doing. But you can have mentors. You should have multiple mentors for the different parts of your life and for the different stages of your life. And I think that's a really important thing to emphasize. So I'm glad that you brought that up.
Totally. And, in our last 2 minutes, I want to ask you two final questions. And the first one is, what do you think, what does the Leadership Alliance mean to you? How has the Leadership Alliance transformed you? How have you been able to stay involved as an alumnus?
So I'm like no words. The Leadership Alliance was, and we talked about this earlier, right? I applied to all these internships, summer internships, and I got none of them. Like I got rejected from every single one of them. And I was about ready to, work the ice cream shop over the summer. And then I got the one letter of acceptance from the Leadership Alliance that told me I was going to do research at Brown University. And that really, that gave me my real taste of research. I had never had it before that, and I wouldn't have gotten it, I don't think, at my institution in the classes that I was in. I could have pursued those opportunities, but at the time, I don't think I was that student. And so this really gave me the chance to do research for real. And so that really changed what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, and also gave me some of the skills to be more confident finishing up my senior year, applying to graduate schools. I knew like what to look for when other students were, just wanting to know how much money a college was going to give you, how much was my stipend going to be, or was I going to have to teach in my, sophomore year? So I knew the good questions to ask. I think because of the Leadership Alliance, I've been able to come back as a Leadership Alliance alumni and go to conferences and speak at conferences. I've seen my cohort, the students that I did the Leadership Alliance, all go on to do amazing things. They become professors and news reporters and all sorts of really amazing things. So it's been great to kind of keep in touch with them. And just to see the next generation kind of come through. So I had this great opportunity a couple of years ago, I guess more than a couple of years ago. I identified a student at my college who needed that little push, didn't know that he could do the research, told him to apply to the Leadership Alliance program. He got in to the one at University of Pennsylvania, did the Leadership Alliance program there, ended up at Vanderbilt for graduate school, and just last year during the pandemic, he defended his thesis, and now he's a Leadership Alliance alumni too. So it's cool to like have it come full circle and for me to bring in the next generation.
That's so special, and totally, if I had to give the current students, one piece of advice, for me, it would just be embrace those connections, embrace your peers, get to know them. Y'all are the doctoral scholars of tomorrow, and you're going to end up working together at one point or another. It's such a small community, you know, and even this past weekend, 3 years after my Vanderbilt experience, we just had a reunion in Nashville, you know, and it was so nice. So I guess, you know, to wrap us up, I guess if you could give one word, and that one word, either something meaningful to you or that one word being a piece of advice or something that you want these current summer students to sort of really embrace and hold close, what would that one word be?
One word.
I know. You can give a sentence too. I just figured, you know, I was like thinking resilience or, you know, I don't know, like, what would you leave them with?
You know, so resilience, I would say yes, like absolutely. But if I want to like go out and like say something a little different, I feel like a lot of people would say resilience. I would say flexibility. Just learn that, you know, things aren't always going to go the way that you think that they're going to go. And that's okay. And sometimes it's really good, right? That you could be led in a different direction that you never anticipated, and that it could work out really well for you. So I think I would go with flexibility.
That's amazing. Well, Dr. Higa, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me, to chat with the students. I had such a blast throughout this phone call, and I even learned, you know, so much as a current, you know, doctoral student, you know, so thank you. And I don't know if I can speak. I'm sure, you know, you'd be willing to take questions offline, you know, if students wanted to reach out to you directly.
Absolutely. I was going to say, yeah, thank you for the opportunity. And I really mean it. Like if you're a student and you want to ask me a question and I didn't get around to it, well, if you're anybody, I guess, you know, because maybe you're not a student, maybe you're already in your career and you want to switch careers. But yeah, send me an email. I don't know if I need to give that to you guys or if that can be given to you, but I could put it in the chat probably. Uh, but yeah, I would be happy to talk to anybody. And I'm so flattered to even be asked to do this. And I just feel really great about being able to talk to all of you guys. So thank you.
That's amazing. And SR-EIP students, you know, we look forward to seeing you on Wednesday for Wednesday's workshop, which is a Pathways to Health Equity. It's going to be an absolutely amazing program. So enjoy it, you know, and enjoy the rest of your summer, everyone. And thank you for this opportunity. Take care.
Bye.
Take care.